There are places in Michigan where summer seems to slow everything down. Good Hart is one of them. It sits along the Lake Michigan shore north of Harbor Springs, where the road bends through thick woods, cottages stand behind trees, and the lake can be heard before it is seen. In June 1968, the Robison family came north from suburban Detroit to spend the summer at their cottage. There were 6 of them: Richard Robison, his wife, Shirley, and their 4 children, 19-year-old Richie, 16-year-old Gary, 12-year-old Randy, and 8-year-old Susan. They had come to a place meant for rest, a place where a family could leave the city behind, open the windows, and listen to the water. By the end of June, all 6 were dead. And for nearly a month, no one knew. The cottage was called Somerset. It stood off a winding road near Lake Michigan, partly screened by trees and set away from its nearest neighbors. It was built of logs and stone, the kind of northern Michigan place that suggested safety, privacy, and permanence. Richard Robison was 42 years old. He owned advertising and publishing businesses in the Detroit area and had built a comfortable life for his family in Lathrop Village. The Robisons had money, a private airplane, and a summer home up north. From a distance, they looked successful, but Richard's business affairs were becoming difficult. Invoices had gone unpaid. Bank accounts were showing irregular activity. Investigators would later focus on missing company funds and one employee who had been trusted to manage the business while the Robisons were away. His name was Joseph Raymond Scolaro III. Scolaro worked closely with Richard. He had access to company records. He understood the finances, and investigators would later conclude that Richard had begun asking questions about money that appeared to be missing. That created a possible motive. But on June 25, 1968, nobody in Good Hart knew that the Robison family might be in danger. The morning passed quietly. Workers had been near the property. Telephone calls were made. The family went about an ordinary summer day. Then, sometime late that afternoon or early that evening, someone approached Somerset. What happened next was fast, deliberate, and brutal. Investigators later developed a likely sequence. The killer may have begun outside. Shots were fired through a cottage window with a .22 caliber rifle. Richard and at least one of the boys may have been struck before anyone fully understood what was happening. Then the killer entered the house. A second weapon, a .25 caliber pistol, was used inside. The family appears to have been attacked in different rooms as they tried to react or escape. Richard was shot several times and also suffered blunt force injuries. Shirley was killed. The 4 children were killed. Some victims were partially covered afterward. The curtains were drawn. A damaged window was concealed. The door was locked. The killer left 6 people inside the cottage and drove away. There was no immediate alarm. No surviving witness ran to a neighbor. No telephone call reached police. The cottage simply went quiet. That silence lasted 27 days. Mail accumulated. Business associates tried to reach Richard. Family members assumed the Robisons were still enjoying their northern Michigan vacation. People in Good Hart had little reason to question the closed cottage. Summer homes often sat quiet for days, even when their owners were nearby. But eventually, the smell reached beyond the house. On July 22nd, caretaker Chauncey Bliss went to Somerset to investigate. The front door was locked. He forced his way inside. What he found turned one of northern Michigan's most peaceful vacation communities into the center of a mass murder investigation. All 6 members of the Robison family were dead. The bodies had remained inside during weeks of summer heat. The condition of the scene made an already difficult investigation far worse. Police arrived to a cottage filled with decomposition, insects, and damaged evidence. The precise time of death had to be reconstructed through telephone records, witness statements, business activity, and what neighbors remembered hearing nearly a month earlier. People recalled gunshots. Others recalled voices. But after 27 days, memories were already uncertain. The killer had gained an enormous advantage: time. The investigation drew the Emmett County Sheriff's Office and Michigan State Police into one of the most demanding cases either agency had faced. Hundreds of tips came in. Investigators interviewed relatives, neighbors, business associates, and former employees. They looked at strangers. They considered family conflicts. They checked known killers. John Norman Collins, later convicted in connection with the series of killings known as the Michigan Murders, was among the many names reviewed. A federal prisoner claimed to know who committed the crime. Other theories pointed toward local grudges, sexual motives, or an unknown intruder. But the investigation kept returning to Joseph Scolaro. Scolaro was not an unknown drifter who happened to pass through Good Hart. He was part of Richard Robison's professional life. He knew the family. He knew where they were staying. And according to investigators, he had serious financial reasons to fear what Richard might soon uncover. Police believed Scolaro had been taking money from Robison's businesses. Some accounts placed the suspected loss near $60,000 over a period of roughly 2 years. That was an enormous sum in 1968. Richard had reportedly begun examining the books. If he confirmed the theft, Scolaro could lose his job, his reputation, and possibly his freedom. Then came the weapons. Investigators believed 4 firearms may have been connected to the crime, including a .22 caliber rifle and .25 caliber pistols. At least 2 weapons or ammunition types were linked in some fashion to Scolaro, although the exact evidentiary chain became one of the reasons the case remained difficult to prosecute. Scolaro said he had given 1 pistol and certain ammunition to Richard. Police were left with a familiar problem in circumstantial cases. Possession could suggest guilt, or it could support the suspect's explanation. Scolaro's movements on June 25th also drew attention. Investigators could not fully verify his whereabouts during a critical period. Police suspected that after speaking with Richard by telephone, Scolaro drove north from the Detroit area, committed the murders, and returned. The drive would have taken several hours each way. It was possible, but possibility is not proof. There was no surviving eyewitness who could place Scolaro inside the cottage. The murder weapons were never recovered. No usable fingerprint conclusively tied him to the scene. And physical evidence that might be tested today had been damaged by heat, decomposition, and the limits of 1968 forensic methods. The crime scene itself created problems. The bodies had remained undiscovered for nearly 4 weeks. People entered the cottage during the recovery and investigation. Evidence was moved. Investigators were working before modern DNA testing, computerized databases, and many of the procedures now expected in a multiple homicide case. They had strong suspicion, they had motive, they had opportunity, they had weapons connections. But they did not have the one piece of evidence that could place Scolaro beyond reasonable doubt inside Somerset at the moment the Robisons died. By late 1969, investigators had completed an extensive report that pointed toward Scolaro. Emmett County Prosecutor Donald Noggle reviewed the case. He declined to bring charges. Noggle said there was not enough evidence to support an arrest and successful prosecution. That decision would remain controversial for decades. For investigators who believed the case was clear, the refusal was deeply frustrating. They saw a suspect with a financial motive. They saw unexplained gaps in his timeline. They saw connections to weapons and ammunition. They saw a man whose employer may have been preparing to expose him. But prosecutors do not merely have to believe someone committed a crime. They must prove it to a jury. A weak prosecution could have ended in acquittal. And once acquitted, Scolaro could not be tried again for the same murders. So the file remained open. The suspect remained free. And Good Hart lived with the knowledge that someone had slaughtered an entire family and never spent a day in court. Years passed. Then, in 1973, the case began moving again. A new prosecutor reviewed the evidence. Investigators reportedly believed they were nearing an indictment. Before that could happen, Joseph Scolaro died by suicide. He was 34 years old. 2 notes were found. In one, he denied killing the Robison family. That denial did not end suspicion. To some investigators, Scolaro's death confirmed what they already believed. To others, suicide proved nothing. A person may take his life because he is guilty. He may also do it because he fears being wrongly charged, because of unrelated personal problems, or for reasons nobody else understands. Scolaro never faced questioning in court. No jury heard the full case. No defense attorney challenged every piece of evidence. No prosecutor presented a final argument. The man police considered their strongest suspect was gone. So was the possibility of a conventional trial. That is why the Good Hart murders occupy such an uncomfortable place in Michigan history. The case is officially unsolved. Yet many investigators and later researchers have concluded that Scolaro was probably responsible. Those are not the same thing. A strong theory is not a conviction. Circumstantial evidence can be powerful, but every link must hold. In the Robison case, several links were strong. Others were damaged, missing, or open to another interpretation. The murders also attracted competing theories. Some suspected a local caretaker. Some focused on an unknown business rival. Others tried to connect the deaths to organized crime, sexual motives, or unrelated serial killers. Investigators examined hundreds of leads, but none produced a more convincing public case than the one built around Scolaro. Decades later, author Marty Link returned to the files. Her book, When Evil Came to Good Hart, was built from police records, court documents, interviews, and historical accounts. The University of Michigan Press describes it as a review of the evidence in one of northern Michigan's best-known cold cases. The research brought renewed attention to the victims and to a community long associated with the crime. It also raised the central question again. Did investigators know who killed the Robisons, but failed to prove it before the suspect died? The cottage is gone now. The physical crime scene no longer exists. The weapons were never found. Evidence has aged, degraded, or disappeared. Witnesses died. Investigators retired. The children who were killed would now be older adults. Richard and Shirley might have lived to see grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Instead, the family remains frozen in the summer of 1968. 6 names in a file, 6 faces in old photographs, 6 people who drove north expecting a vacation and never returned home. True crime stories often end with an arrest, a courtroom, a verdict, a sentence. The Good Hart murders offer none of those things. There is no moment when the handcuffs close. No jury foreman stands and announces a decision. No killer explains why 4 children had to die along with their parents. What remains is a case assembled from motive, money, weapons, and missing time. A suspect who denied everything, a prosecutor who wanted more evidence, and a quiet cottage that held its secret for 27 days. Perhaps Joseph Scolaro killed the Robison family. Many investigators believed he did. The available evidence may point more strongly toward him than anyone else. But history has to stop where proof stops. And in Good Hart, proof stopped just short of the courtroom. That is why the case still unsettles northern Michigan, not simply because 6 people were murdered, but because the answer may have been standing in front of investigators all along, close enough to suspect, close enough to accuse, but never close enough to convict. This is End of the Road in Michigan. Thanks for listening. Please follow the program for more strange, tragic, and unresolved stories from Michigan's past.